Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we're continuing this quest of dealing with the concept of scarcity, trying to make a better society. And we understand that people deal with scarcity by creating systems to have their needs and wants met by the production of goods and services. Now, how do we make a political system and how do we design political systems to deal with the economic systems that deal with the concept of scarcity? First of all, let's take a look at really big um, political systems. Nations and states, those are usually said synonymously, and they are not the same thing. Okay, let's start with a state. What is a state? Well, a state is a group of people within defined borders that has a government and that has sovereignty. And sovereignty is absolute power within its own borders. Now, these four things must exist for a state to exist. And a state, another name for a state, a geographical name for a state, is a country. They're two the same things. You might say, well, California, I thought California is a state. Well, only in like the terms of the culture of the United States. In political science, a state is a group of people within defined borders that has government and sovereignty. California does not have sovereignty. California does have to answer to the US government and the Constitution of the United States. There's no US, there is a US military. There's no like California military to make itself its own country, its own state. But here in the United States, it's given that name. The reality is it is a sub-region. Okay. So a state is a group of people within defined borders with government and, of course, sovereignty. So you have this territory, this piece of property here. Those defined borders, there are people, and within that territory is also government. A government is simply institutions that make and enforce public policy. What is included in public policy? Laws, regulations, actions, protecting contracts, all those kinds of things. Those make up what government is. Those institutions can be small, those institutions can be super complex. Okay. Now, so you have government. We're missing the one last thing, and that is sovereignty. That is absolute power within your own borders. And this means that other countries, other states look at you and say, well, I can't just go in there and do whatever I want because that country has sovereignty. So, how do you know you're a state? Usually it's because everybody else on the planet looks at you and says, hey, you're a state. I recognize your authority. Okay. Now, governments also have certain things they can do to manage to exist. Number one, they exert power, and power is the ability to rule. We'll dive deeper into this later. Number two, they'll exert authority, some kind of right to actually rule. Something gives governments the right to actually rule. Power is the use and the ability to actually rule. And finally, legitimacy. And legitimacy is the people's belief that a government has the right to rule. Governments really can't stick around a very long time unless they're really super totalitarian if they don't have the legitimacy of the people. Eventually, the people rise up. They say, your government's illegit. Goodbye. You're toast. And of course, to protect all of this stuff here, to make sure your sovereignty allows the government to have authority, legitimacy, power, and the population to live and thrive, you must have a military. But understand, the job of the military is to protect the country from the country's enemies. The job of the military is not to like protect the government from the people. That's not the job. The military is exists to protect the sovereignty of the country against somebody else. The citizens of the country are not the enemy. Therefore, the military's job is not to impose its will on the citizens. That's what authoritarian regimes do. So, this is a state. Then, what is a nation? A nation is, simply put, a group of people connected by common features, whether that be race, language, religion, ethnicity, political identity, aspirations, you name it. Nations exist all over the place. So, this is the United States of America. Is it a nation? Well, yeah, we do have something in common. We're all Americans, but it is also, of course, a state. It has people, government, defined borders, and sovereignty. Okay. However, there are nations that exist within the United States too. This is one example of a nation. This is the Navajo Nation. What do they have in common? They are Navajo. I mean, that's simple. These are the most common nations that exist within the country. Also, groups of people with something in common. They even make like Raider Nation. like sports teams. And what does Raider Nation have in common? They're all losers. Now, let's do the nations that exist within the AP6 countries. This is the United Kingdom. The nations are very evident: England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. These are seen as separate nations. The Welsh, the Northern Irish, the Scottish, and the English. Together, they make the United Kingdom, but these are four distinct nations. And as we have seen, Scotland and Northern Ireland have had attempts to break away, Scotland to become more independent, Northern Ireland to push to become a part of the Republic of Ireland. This is Russia. Russia has a lot of different ethnic groups in it. We often think of like Russians as very common white European Russians. That's only one type of ethnic group. But the ones I want to focus on are down here in what's known as the Caucasus regions of southern Russia. This is places like Dagestan, Chechnya, North and South Ossetia. These are, again, known as the Caucasus. And you're going to see a very big ethnic split here, a nation, and they are often seen as Chechens that have been pushing back against Moscow for many, 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 many years. They are more followers of Islam. There's been violence between the nations that exist in these regions and Moscow. It's been clamped down a lot because of the war with Ukraine in 2022, but it's still a very specific national ethnic region, the Caucasus region that includes Chechnya, Dagestan, and North Ossetia. In China, the dominant ethnicity is Han Chinese, but there are two other nations that exist, and one of them sees itself, a lot of the Tibetans, which was taken over by Mao and the Chinese Communist Party in the 1950s. The Tibetans in exile actually see their nation under the occupation of the Chinese Communist Party, and there are actually independence movements around the world, not in China, to get them to be more free. The Uyghurs are a Near East Muslim ethnic culture that is more dominant in Central Asia. They are located in this region known as Xinjiang. It is majority Uyghur, but the Han and the Chinese Communist Party have gone in. There are concentration camps. They destroy a lot of the culture of the Uyghurs in that region, and it is if they want a definition of a cultural attempt at genocide, it is going on as the Han Chinese and the Chinese Communist Party basically drive out the Uyghurs in Xinjiang and their ability to do things like procreate. There's forced sterilization, forced abortions, those kinds of things. Um, Tibet's a different issue. Tibet is a hotbed of tourism, and so you don't have the push as much to destroy the culture of the Buddhists in Tibet. But definitely, Xinjiang is an example of a literal cultural genocide right now. Within Iran, you have mainly everybody here is Persian, except this region up here in the northwest of the country, which includes Iraq, Turkey, and then Iran. This is known as Kurdistan. They are the Kurds. They are ethnically different than the rest of Iran. Turkey and Iran, as a government, both governments do not like Kurds at all. Um, uh, Masha Amini, the woman who was killed because she didn't wear the appropriate hijab, she was Kurdish, and a lot of the uprisings started in this area of Kurdistan. But the people in this region of Iran are seen as as kind of inferior to the rest of the Persians that exist within Iran. This is Nigeria. Nigeria is just full of like tiny little ethnic tribal nations that exist within the country. The four that you're really going to need to know are the House of Fulani in the north, the Yorubans, which includes Lagos, the Igbo, and the Ija that are located in the Niger Delta. They are four distinct nations of people. Remember, in Nigeria, a lot of people see themselves more their ethnic tribe than they do Nigerian, which of course causes conflict and a lack of unity within the country. Okay. Finally, we have Mexico. There is a split ethnically between the mestizo, which were the ethnic, like basically the mix between the Spanish and indigenous that came together, and then bang, you have that kind of a like an ethnic mix that is dominant right now in Mexico, and then you have indigenous native Mexicans. This is old Mayan and and Aztec tribes. The one we're going to really point out is Chiapas, which is a lot of indigenous Mayans. They see themselves, Chiapas sees itself kind of as an independent part of Mexico. They are not officially broken away, but ethnically they see themselves more of an it's one of the few anarchist societies in the planet. It is an insanely poor part of Mexico, and they feel like the government, as a nation of old Mayans and followers of Emiliano Zapata of the Mexican Revolution, they see themselves as massively underrepresented within the Mexican government. That's something you'll notice by many of these nations, whether it's places like Scotland or Chiapas or Iran, the Kurds. They just see themselves as not really represented within government. They see themselves being pushed towards a worse lifestyle, and this leads to sometimes violence, but definitely tensions with the rest of the main government. Okay, so we have states that have people, defined borders, government, and sovereignty. We have nations that have groups of people with very similar common characteristics.